A German officer steps from behind the corner at a distance of exactly 1 meter 20 centimeters. The American Marine holds a rifle wedged tight against the narrow corridor walls. With no room to swing the barrel or deploy the bayonet, his hand drops toward his hip. The Model 1911 pistol clears the leather holster with a distinct metallic scrape. One round fires. The target collapses onto the concrete floor. This brief physical encounter is the final field examination for a state procurement program. The outcome resolves 20 years of strategic arguments, pointing directly back to the original military specifications written in 1911. The Marine remains standing. The rapid conclusion of this encounter invalidated the basic calculations of German command. The Wehrmacht entered the Second World War with a consistent doctrine. It was logical, rational, and optimized for a flawed scenario. Pistols were secondary tools. Officers, vehicle crews, and support personnel carried them. Command expected these men to rarely engage targets. When they did, the guidelines dictated a clear mechanical requirement. They needed a flat trajectory to create distance while soldiers readied their primary arms. This tactical approach produced the Luger P-08 and the Walther P-38. Both platforms chambered the 9mm Parabellum cartridge in an 8-round magazine. The projectile was light. The 9mm muzzle velocity reached approximately 350 meters per second. This high velocity extended the effective engagement range. Engineers optimized the round for distance and control. Real combat demanded immediate stopping power. A lightweight bullet moving at high speed pierces tissue cleanly. Kinetic energy passes through. Calculated models drove the procurement strategy. Planners prioritized extended reach over close quarters kinetic impact. They assumed engagements would always occur at moderate distances. The design philosophy hinged on delaying the advancing enemy. Engineers built the weapon to buy time. The United States secured these ballistic data 40 years before German engineers finalized their doctrine. 3 meters of dense jungle separated the opposing forces. During the Philippine-American War, spanning from 1899 to 1902, the .38 Long Colt revolver failed its primary operational test. Wet jungle environments across Mindanao Island reduced sightlines, forcing American troops to engage Moro warriors at point-blank range. The combat mechanics followed a physical sequence. A projectile struck the advancing fighter. The individual absorbed the kinetic impact without losing forward momentum. The attacker continued charging through the humidity, closing the distance to under 1 meter before striking. The .38 Long Colt lacked the mechanical capacity to transfer adequate terminal energy. Weighing 150 grains, the bullet exited the barrel at 235 meters per second. This energy output proved insufficient to physically arrest a moving human body. Army medical reports documented Moro fighters absorbing up to 4 direct hits while sustaining their assault. Command officers demanded a revised mechanical baseline. In 1904, the military initiated the Thompson-Lagarde tests to define a new caliber. Ordnance experts gathered empirical evidence regarding tissue trauma. The resulting commission determined that any sidearm required sufficient physical mass to anchor an advancing target. The data collected from the Philippine archipelago demanded a new mechanical solution to the problem of inadequate stopping power. John Browning answered the Commission's request with a revised schematic built entirely around a heavy projectile. The military adopted this platform in 1911 as the standard-issue sidearm for all branches. The resulting weapon intentionally sacrificed total magazine capacity to accommodate a significantly larger bullet diameter. Terminal ballistics dictate that a standard 9.02 mm projectile often passes completely through soft tissue, exiting the body while leaving kinetic energy unexpended. Conversely, an 11.48 mm bullet traveling at 253 meters per second deforms upon impact and dumps kinetic energy directly into the surrounding tissue structures. The width of 11.48 mm provides a 60% larger frontal area compared to a standard 9 mm projectile. 2.46 millimeters of additional diameter separates the two calibers. The single-stack steel magazine locks into the grip frame with a pronounced, concentrated weight. It holds exactly 7 cartridges, keeping the overall grip profile narrow enough for an average hand. That raw physical dimension compensates for a limited ammunition supply during close-quarters engagements. The underlying doctrine assumed the operator would effectively place those limited shots under extreme physiological stress. Engineers staked the entire platform on mechanical accuracy and raw projectile mass. Ballistic data means nothing if the reload cycle fails. Zero margin for error upon extraction. The operator draws the weapon in blind panic. His hands sweat. The firing stance collapses. The ejector throws the spent casing clear even when the shooter cants the frame at 45 degrees. This specific clearance angle prevents a critical jam during an unconventional grip. Every mechanical stage accounts for human physiological breakdown. The user sweeps the external thumb safety downward. The internal lock disengages with a distinct steel click. The operator maintains full contact with the grip panel. He pulls the trigger. The primer ignites, containing over 1,300 bar of chamber pressure, driving the heavy 400-gram slide backward. The steel extractor maintains constant tension on the rim. It pulls the hot brass cylinder rearward. The internal feed geometry forces the next blunt-nosed round straight up into the chamber. It bypasses the nosedive malfunctions common in earlier European semi-automatic designs. Engineers eliminated complex manual actions from the firing sequence. The mechanism isolates the operator's physical stress from the internal mechanical physics. Engineers created the weapon to operate without preparation. 33 years after engineers finalized the mechanical drawings, American military doctrine faced an operational trial across the Pacific Island chains. A Marine advances blindly through the dense sugarcane vegetation of Saipan in June 1944, where visibility drops to 0. The island measures 24 kilometers in length. Mount Tapochau rises 474 meters above the initial invasion beaches. An unseen enemy position opens fire from a distance of just 4.5 meters. The Marine holds a loaded M1 Garand rifle, but the restricted angle inside the thick stalks prevents him from turning the barrel. The standard infantry rifle measures exactly 1 meter 10 centimeters from stock to muzzle. The physical landscape immediately turns the primary infantry weapon into a piece of useless dead weight. The Marine drops the rifle into the dirt and draws his sidearm from the holster. 2 rounds discharge from the heavy pistol. The first projectile stops the forward charge. The second round secures the tactical outcome of the encounter. This specific engagement geometry nullifies the calculated ballistic advantages of traditional long-barreled firearms. This localized encounter represented a broader operational pattern documented across the deployment of 71,000 American combat troops. After-action reports from the Pacific Theater cataloged hundreds of similar contact engagements, where established combat protocols simply did not apply. The restrictive geometry of cave warfare and dense island vegetation forced infantry units to rely entirely on the handgun for close-quarter survival. The issued sidearm possessed enough projectile mass to halt the advancing target before the enemy reached the shooter. The duration of the entire firefight measured exactly 4 seconds. By autumn, these localized reports merged into a mandatory tactical trend across all military branches. Combat engineers descended into the lightless coral caves of Peleliu. The Umerbrogel pocket dictated new terms of combat. 3 months later, this network of limestone ridges and interconnected tunnels forced a complete hardware shift. The assault on Peleliu generated one of the highest casualty rates among all United States amphibious operations. Survival depended on subterranean geometry. Soldiers fought in spaces measured strictly in feet. The underground corridors restricted movement entirely. A man could touch both opposing walls by raising his elbows. Rifles failed in this spatial constraint. Standard infantry weapons lacked the necessary clearance to pivot toward targets. The Model 1911 pistol solved the mechanical problem. Troops drew the weapon deliberately for the final phase of every tunnel assault. Field records documented a definitive departure from headquarters instructions. The sidearm ceased being a ceremonial badge of rank. At zero distance, it delivered lethal force without mechanical failure. Tank crews rejected the standard submachine gun. The larger weapon occupied too much volume inside a burning armored hull. Crews needed rapid extraction. The pistol provided it. Pilots carried the heavy sidearm into cramped fighter cockpits. Surviving aviators reached for it on hostile terrain. Everything else was gone. Demolition engineers relied on the pistol during explosive placements. Standard rifle fire in those enclosed zones endangered the teams directly. Island by island, the .45 caliber accumulated a verifiable combat record. Real resistance validated the heavy projectile mass. The sidearm became the primary weapon in confined spaces. While the Pacific Theater confirmed American calculations, the European campaigns exposed severe flaws in German military logic. Pre-war field manuals envisioned orderly engagements at rifle range, but the combat operations of 1944 and 1945 forced a collision in the tight urban confines of Europe. The battle for Aachen brought the first major confrontation onto German territory, where massive stone structures and narrow streets dictated the rules of engagement. Similar close-quarters environments degraded Wehrmacht tactics across the dense hedgerows of Normandy and among the thick trees of the Hürtgen forest. In the dark, constrained space of a ruined stairwell in Aachen, visibility dropped to a mere 3 meters. Thick plaster dust hung in the stagnant air between the shattered concrete floors. A Wehrmacht officer reached for his Walther P-38 to delay an advancing American adversary. The American infantryman raised his M1911 and delivered a decisive shot. A .45 caliber projectile concluded the close-quarters encounter before the German weapon cleared its leather holster. The American sidearm forced a final tactical decision upon the enemy. The Walther P-38 represented an excellent piece of engineering for its intended secondary role. It provided reliable accuracy for commanders managing their troops during distant infantry firefights. However, at a range of 3 meters, superior mechanical ergonomics could not compensate for a flawed tactical theory. The Wehrmacht had drafted its pre-war plans around the sidearm primarily as an instrument for brief suppression and psychological control. A German officer simply lacked the time to evaluate the situation. The cost of this staff error measured exactly in millimeters. Why did a high-quality German pistol lose to an American counterpart? The answer lay in the physical diameter of the bullet. A 9mm round cuts a wound channel measuring less than 8.5 millimeters across. The .45 caliber projectile tears a path closer to 12.7 millimeters wide. Both rounds deliver similar kinetic energy upon impact. However, energy without diameter only creates depth. At a distance of 3 meters, depth alone rarely stops a forward charge. Width destroys tissue on contact. The United States Ordnance Department built their weapon around this physical reality. The Walther P-38 lacked this capability. German craftsmanship remained excellent. The mechanism itself fired reliably, yet the underlying doctrine never demanded instant stopping power. By 1944, field reports highlighted this fatal discrepancy. But replacing a caliber midway through a global conflict requires massive logistical shifts. Production lines cannot transition to a new ammunition standard without halting factory output for months. Replacing a military doctrine in the middle of a war is impossible. Data harvested during the Philippine War protected American infantry for the remainder of the 20th century. The sidearm maintained a formal operational footprint for exactly 74 years. Throughout subsequent deployments in Korea and Vietnam, personnel consistently validated the earlier field reports. By 1985, regular armed forces transitioned to the 9mm Beretta platform. However, specialized Marine Corps detachments refused to abandon the older caliber. They retained customized variants of the 1911 platform into the 2010s. Combat conditions repeatedly confirmed that larger projectile mass proved superior. The United States military had resolved the mechanical requirements of close-quarters engagements decades earlier. They implemented these solutions before most combatants of the Second World War were born. The German High Command never experienced a comparable overseas proving ground. Their strategic calculations remained optimized for open terrain rather than constrained environments. When tactical geometry shifted into European hedgerows, the resulting discrepancy yielded fatal outcomes. The German sidearm was designed for the conflict the General Staff had planned. It failed against the chaotic reality their soldiers actually faced on the ground. American ordnance departments possessed the correct answer because they had previously paid the attrition cost in a different theater. This strategic miscalculation manifested its ultimate cost during the final physical intersection of two opposing infantrymen converging at a distance of exactly 1.2 meters.